This is my natural form, my natural nature. I let go of all the identities, the labels. I sit in my eternal form. I am a peaceful soul. Om Shanti. So, Raja Yoga is all about discovering the self. I am a soul, a point of light. The soul is not male or female. Only when it enters the body does it take on the role of a male or female. The soul is just a tiny star, just amazing, this infinitesimal point of light. And I, the soul, have no beginning, I have no end. But I need the body to experience and express. But what has happened is that I have forgotten my identity, and I've started to identify with the roles and the labels. And it is these roles and labels that actually been the sort of, you can say, the curse of me. So I experience happiness, but I also experience sorrow because I'm taking from an external dependency. And when that dependency is taken away, a role, a relationship, a possession, a situation, that's when the soul in the wrong consciousness experiences sorrow. So when I cast off that and I come to the essence of who I am, then whether I am in a relationship or not, whether I have possessions or not, or situations are changing, it doesn't matter because my happiness is not based on the external, it's coming from the internal. So the more I stay in this awareness, I'm a soul, the more I will experience stability in my life. So we then explored that the soul is mind, intellect, and sanskars. It's just working at three different conscious levels. It's not that the soul is divided into three parts. The soul is always one entity, but it works at three different energy levels. The mind is the one that creates thoughts, experiences, it imagines. The intellect is the one that understands, reasons, makes decisions. And then the sanskars is the habits, personality traits, the memories. It's all in there. And when the soul leaves the body, it takes those sanskars with it. And in our last session, we explored the philosophy of karma, or the law of karma. And this law is absolute. Whether we accept or reject has no bearing because the law will always prevail. And every soul is bound by this law of karma. So the word karma means actions. So it's the law of actions. And in its simplest definition, it's what I give, I get back in equal amount. So for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Every time the soul performs an action, it sows the seed, and that seed will bear fruit. Now, whether the seed is good or bad depends on the intent behind the action. So what determines a positive or negative action is not the outcome of the action, it's the intention behind the act. So if I have selfish motives, then it's definitely a negative action. And consequently, if I perform actions in that awareness, I create an account. And that account has to be settled. It cannot be written off. It cannot be transferred. It has to be settled. So to the extent that I performed that selfish act, then accordingly, I will receive the return of that. So if my intentions are selfless, then I'm sowing the seeds of positive karma, good karma, and I will subsequently reap the return of that. Now, sometimes the return of that action is instantaneous. Sometimes it's a little bit later, and sometimes it's carried forward into the next birth. And the soul always comes back in a human form. The soul will not come back in any other species. So the sanskars and the karmic accounts that the soul has will be carried forward into its next birth. That birth may be a male or a female. Usually it alternates. So the soul is a mind, intellect, sanskars, and through the body, it performs actions, and those actions are bound by the law of karma. So generally, the soul is on a downward trend. And as the soul forgets itself, it becomes more and more body conscious. And so the intent is based on the awareness. So because the soul has forgotten itself and it's identifying with the body and anything associated with the body, then the consciousness is determining the intention. In this instance, it will be selfish. When we're soul conscious, our intentions are selfless, and we always perform positive actions. So in today's world, we can see there's an exponential rise in the suffering and sorrow that human beings are experiencing throughout the world. Whether it's mental, physical, there is some forms of sorrow. And that is because it is the settling of karma. So we perform karma with ourselves. So it's good to look after your body, have a healthy lifestyle, don't abuse your body. Then we have karmic accounts with other souls, so be nice to them. And then obviously we also have accounts with nature. So as we can see, nature is on the offensive, and there's a lot of sorrow experienced through the elements because we've exploited nature as well for our own selfish intentions. So this is just karma being settled. Based on this, it's a downward trend, and the suffering and sorrow will increase. However, is there an end to this? Well, watch this space. But we need to introduce another element, and this is, you can say, the essence of Raj Yoga. So the clue is in the meditation that we teach, Raj Yoga. So the word Raja means a king, and yoga means a connection. So when I connect with myself, I attain self-sovereignty. I am the ruler. If I forget who I am, then others rule me, situations rule me, possessions rule me, circumstances, people, work, anything that's associated with the body. But when I'm soul conscious, I'm the master of the self. And then the other aspect is that we need to connect with the highest source. So today's topic is about God. Now, before you switch off and run away, listen. I'm going to give you a sort of new ideas. Maybe you've heard some of these ideas before, and it will probably sort of bring more clarity. But definitely, it will open your eyes a little bit. And I'm not just talking about the physical eyes, I'm talking about your third eye. Now, we all turn to God at some point in our lives. I mean, I know I have turned to God, especially when I'm experiencing sorrow. And before I did meditation, I definitely called out to God, but the problem was I didn't know who or what God was. So it's very much a blind faith. I knew there is a God, but I don't know who or what God is and how I make that connection. So you just, well, what I did, I just shouted out. However, we need to understand that just as the physical body has a biological father, the soul has a spiritual father, the supreme soul. So just as I'm a point of light, like this picture behind me, this image behind me, God is also a point of light. Just like you and I, it's not that God is any bigger or any smaller, it's just a point of light. So when I start understanding on a sort of spiritual level that I'm a soul, then it's easier to understand God. So God is not a physical being. So if you ask people, what's your impression of God? Normally they have an image of an old person. And throughout cultures across the world, people have different images of God and different ideas. Well, let me throw some information to you and see what you think. So as I said, God is just a point of light. And we need to understand about God. Call it divine, call it higher consciousness, call it the supreme soul, whatever you feel comfortable with. But God is just a soul, just a dot, point of light, just like you and I. And in the same way, I play many roles, I have different qualities, then I need to understand that God is also an actor, also has qualities, also has a home, also communicates. So exploring this, I need to understand God is an actor. And most people have a relationship with God, as I said, especially at times of sorrow, and less so at times of happiness. Hardly any at all, I would say, when souls are happy. And God would play the role of a mother, a father, a teacher, a guide, a brother, a sister. When you explore this, we begin to realize that God can play many roles. Just as in our lives, we get into relationships because each relationship gives us a different experience. So it's like I can have a relationship with my dad or my mum, but it's a different relationship between my dad and compared to my mum. But then I can have a different relationship that's totally different compared to my mum and dad with some friends. So each of those relationships gives me a different experience. And sometimes when I'm attached to that relationship and that relationship has broken down or has gone, I feel emptiness and I try to replace that with a similar relationship. So in this awareness where I'm surrounded by all these relationships, I'm dependent on so many for how I feel on the inside. And sometimes some people don't always have a relationship, even of a mother or a father or a brother or a sister. And when we talk about those relationships with others, we feel sometimes that we're missing out on something. But what if we had those relationships with the divine being? So I could experience all relationships in this one relationship. Whereas in the physical sense, I'm surrounded by umpteen numbers of relationships. And it's very difficult to keep a tab on all those relationships. And sometimes I will only have a relationship with someone when I need something that maybe be probably once in a life. But if I have all relationships with God, it sort of frees me from all the bondages, the dependencies I have depending on other relationships, because they're not always going to be there. Think about a time when you've approached a friend for help. Perhaps you phoned them in the middle of the night and you were very grateful that they sort of picked up the phone and they sort of gave you words of comfort. But what if you did that on a regular basis? Would they be happy? I don't think so. They'll probably be sort of saying, oh, leave me alone. So the relationship is going to become strained. But with God, I can have a relationship 24/7. See, God is very patient. God is a very good listener. So I can experience all relationships with the one. Now, when my relationship with the one is good, then my relationship with the whole world is going to be good. You know, normally we're very selective in our relationships on a physical level. But when we are completely absorbed in the one relationship with the divine, then I don't need anything from the outside. And so therefore, I will always feel full. So I can interact with all the relationships, or little relationships in terms of quantity, but I'm not dependent on them. So I'll always feel full, and I'll never feel inadequate if someone walks out of my life, because I'm no longer taking, but I'm giving to that relationship. So God can play many roles. Now, what about God's qualities? So just give you this. What about God's qualities? You know, people say God is love, God is truth. That is true. I mean, God doesn't have love, he is love. So like an ocean, he's unlimited. You know, there's no end to his love or his bliss or his purity or his happiness. So he is the ocean of knowledge, the ocean of peace, the ocean of purity. He is the almighty authority, one who is experienced in all might. Now, most people in this world will have certain qualities, and they are a little bit up and down at times. Sometimes they're very happy, sometimes they're not so happy. But with God, the one thing that we'll realize is that God's attainments are always constant, that they never diminish. He has no impurity. There is no anger. There are no vices in God. God is forever pure, ever pure. So God is always an embodiment of virtues. And, you know, people do devotion to God, and maybe they would even thank God if they get if something happens that's very wonderful, or, you know, they get a child or a new job, a new relationship. Now, do you think God becomes even happier? So you praise God, you thank God, and you think God becomes even happier. And then tomorrow things go wrong, you lose your job, relationships breaks down, and you say, thank you, God, you know, in a very sarcastic way. Do you think God's happiness comes down? I don't think so. So God is beyond influence. You can't bribe God. God is not corruptible. God is always the ocean of happiness, the ocean of love, the ocean of peace, the ocean of purity. So when I experience God with all his attainments, I realize he's abundantly overflowing. He's not full, he's overflowing. Because if you're overflowing, it means you're giving. If you're full, you can't really give. So when I have a relationship with God, I'm going to experience all those wonderful attainments that he has. So I don't know about you, but I've never met a human being yet that is constantly happy, constantly peaceful. You know, they have their flaws, and that's associated with body consciousness. But we strive to become like God in the terms of his character, his personality. So God plays many roles. He has all these wonderful virtues. And can't keep calling God God. We need to have a name. You know, it's like when you go to work or you move in to a new house, get to know your neighbors, you introduce your name. So what's God's name? It's interesting, wherever you go, there's a name for God. And just as there are languages of so many varieties, there are so many varieties of names for God. But let's explore this a little bit further. My name, and this is my name for this physical body, is actually pronounced Parmjit. It's a Punjabi name. And I was born in India, came over here, and when the name was translated, because there's certain pronunciations that people find difficult in English, my name was spelled as Parmjit, and so most of people know me as Parmjit. Now, if someone knows me as Parmjit and someone else knows me as Parmjit, if they met, they may think, they will probably think that they were talking about two different people, but only I would know that you're talking about me. So in our lives, we have many different names. But if we were to put in an application, we would only give our real name, not all the pet names or all those funny names that we have. So God also has many different names. And in fact, when you start studying names and you go the meaning behind those names, we actually realize it's associated with a role that he plays. And I just want to clarify this point about he. God is actually not male or female, because it's just a point of light. God is just light. But it is the relationship, it is the context. So you could say when the soul is without a body, it is like a male, it is a son, and therefore the father would be the father, male. So it is only in that context. But if you feel God to be a she, it's okay. Never been sort of hung up about gender consciousness. And coming to the aspect of God's name, I mean, some people will call him by one name, some will call him by another name. For instance, the Muslims will call him Allah, Khuda. In fact, they have about 700 names for him. Whereas somebody from, say, a Hindu, they will probably say Paramatma, and they would say Prabhu, Bolinath, Bhagwan, Shiva. Whereas the people from the Jewish faith would probably say Yahweh. So there are as many names for God as there are languages in the world. And he must have countless names. But just as some people know me as Parmjit, some people know me as Parmjit, I know that they're talking to me in the same way. Although we may call God by different names, and it's pretty certain that if you're, say, of a Muslim faith, you're hardly going to call God by what the Hindus call God by. So it is relative, but God would know that you're talking or communicating with him, because there's only one God. There's not two gods. It's not that God has a father. No, he is the supreme being. See, the soul is beyond birth and death. He's always existed, just as you and I have always existed. So the question also arises then why is he known as the Father? Well, we need to understand a little bit more. And we'll cover those points in our next session, next week. So whichever name you want to call God by, that's fine. And I used to call God like any other person, a very generic God. But using the word God seems very distant. I felt that I couldn't really have a sort of meaningful relationship with God. But now I call him by Baba, B-A-B-A. By calling him Baba, I find that I have this sort of very intimate relationship where he can be my friend, he can be my companion, he can be my business partner, whatever relationship. And I feel that way I can have a sort of a meaningful relationship. And it's not based on sort of, I hope he's listening, I hope he's connecting. So it's a very personal. So whatever name you call God by, it's fine. As I said, I understand that some people are very stuck, very rigid with their name calling for God, but I'm sure God is beyond any forms of rigidness. He's quite flexible. So we have a being here then who can play many roles, has all these wonderful qualities, and they're overflowing and known by many names, but I would suspect that he only has one name. And but he gets used to by calling many names, just as you and I will get used to by being called by so many different names. Now, where does God live? Just as you and I have a home, we've got an address. Where's God's address? Now, when you ask people where does God reside, you get different answers with different faith communities, people with different cultures. Some say he's up there, he lives up in the clouds. Some say he's everywhere. Some say, well, I haven't got a clue. So let's explore some of these sort of ideas. Let's explore the aspect of that God lives everywhere. Well, in that very first statement, I said, I'm a soul. A soul is a point of light. Now, if I, the soul, am a point of light, and I occupy this one body, I'm not going to occupy two bodies or three bodies, etc. Just as you have a house and it's got maybe 2 or 3, 4 plus rooms, you can only stay in one room. So God is also a point of light. So therefore, God cannot also be everywhere. He cannot be omnipresent. If God was omnipresent, think about this. Why would we need to go to places of worship? Is he more present there than he is here? And if God is everywhere, and as a mark of respect, people normally sort of clean themselves up before going into that place of worship. I mean, I know that in Sikh temples or gurdwaras, they cover their heads, they take their shoes off, as do the Hindus, and I know the Muslims wash their feet, wash their hands. So there's a sense of cleanliness. So if God is everywhere, then why do they put their shoes back on? Why do they walk on God with disrespect? So that means that God is in the dirt. Is God in the dirt? If God is everywhere, then you're lying on a hot summer's day and there's a little insect crawling up your leg. What do? Did you flick it? Did you kill it? What did you do? You killed God. You flicked God. Did you flick God? Of course you didn't. So the very things that we actually demonstrate reveals that God can't be omnipresent. If God was omnipresent, then we wouldn't behave the way we would behave at the moment. So if God is in me, that is, God is omnipresent, and God is love, God is peace, then how can I exhibit any forms of vice, anger, especially greed or desires or arrogance? So the aspect of God being omnipresent just doesn't work, because it is almost like we just say things. Someone must have come up with this idea that God is everywhere, and a lot of people must have bought into that. But as I say, it's without understanding. And God is up there. Okay, so we know that beyond the sky, there's just space. But what if you continue to travel? Have you ever wondered what's beyond the universe? You know, the universe is huge in distance, measured in light years. By the way, that's the distance light can travel in 1 year, which is just a lot of distance. So if the universe is expanding, which is a physical world, then it must be coming to a point where there must be another dimension. That is, there must be a non-physical world. And that world is beyond the realms of anything that we understand today. So it will be a silent world, a world that's completely still. And this is what people refer to as nirvana, Brahman, Paramdhan. Just like God has many names, this has been remembered. Here's this image. So if you were to go beyond the physical world, you would go to a non-physical dimension. So this non-physical world is where God resides. And it is also your place of residence. This is where you and I also came from. So there's this two physical world, the physical world and the non-physical world. There is another world in between, which we'll explore a little bit further in our sessions right towards the end. So one is a physical world, one is like a subtle world, and one is just a world that's just completely dead silent, a self-luminous world of red light. And this is where God resides. And God is just a point of light. This is, I suppose you could say, when people say he's up there, they're really referring to that God resides in the highest place. And the highest place is a land. And it's not referring to a physical world, but a sort of, you could say, a land that's beyond the physical world. A land that's constantly peaceful, constantly still, ever pure. So in that context, it will be the highest place. So I can understand now when people say he's up there because he's living up high above, but it's beyond this physical world. Okay. So how do we connect with God? You know, we all connect with people, don't we? And our favorite platform is definitely the mobile phone. I think it's become an extension of our arm. I mean, some people are constantly on their phone. Now, in order to make the connection with someone, you have to be on the same wavelength. You have to be on the same page. So here we have an example of electrical cables, and the copper, the one that actually conducts the electricity, is covered with some insulation. Now, if one end of the cable is covered with insulation, and the other side, the copper, is exposed, even though you put them together, electricity will not flow through because the insulation is preventing the copper metal to connect with each other. So what do? You remove the insulation, and then the connection is made. So in the same way, what stops us from connecting with God is the insulation of this physical body, because we think we are the physical body, and people say God created man in his own image. And this is why you'll see in certain faiths that the males keep their facial hair. I know my father, he's a devout Sikh, and when he came to the UK, he had a turban, long hair, and a beard. But then he got corrupted, and he shaved his hair, his beard rather, and cut his hair. But then he became a born-again seeker because they still think that God is a male, and that's the physical form. So they're trying to connect with God on a very physical level. So you're not going to make the connection like that to cables. I suppose another way you can look at it is like the transmitter is transmitting in FM, but you're connected on an AM. Your receiver, your radio is trying to pick up AM signals. So even though you go from one end to the other, you'll never make the connection because you're not on the same wavelength. So it's not the transmitter that's going to change to AM. It's the receiver that has to change to FM. So when you buy a new television and it does that auto tune, it tunes into the signals that the TV transmitter is doing. So in the same way, God is always soul conscious. God is always transmitting peace, love, happiness, bliss, purity. But the problem is we're on a different wavelength. We're still thinking on a physical level, I am so-and-so, I am this, I am that. So what do we have to do? Well, it's not that God is going to change. It's like that transmitter. It's not going to change. So it's the receiver. So we have to let go of the consciousness of this physical body and come into the same awareness that God is, a soul. And when we connect in that soul conscious point to point, then watch the magic happen. That's when the soul receives power. Okay, so we're getting some ideas about God. So God is an actor, plays many roles, has all these wonderful virtues, no trace of any impurity or vice, and known by many names, but probably has one name, and lives outside of this physical world, and so remains beyond the laws of the physical world. And he's only one. There's not two gods or three gods. There's just one God, the supreme soul. And this soul will be the father of all souls. So we connect with God being on the same awareness, same level. So if I'm not soul conscious, I will never be able to make that connection with the divine. So the divine is not going to change his awareness. We have to change. Now, we have an idea how to connect, but the next thing is, why would I want to connect with God? I want you to think of someone in your life who's not so happy, who's a little bit angry, gets upset, has a sensitive nature. Now, how do you feel when you remember that individual? Do you feel happy? Do you feel electric? No. You probably feel a bit down. Now, I want you to remember someone in your life who's always happy. That when they walk in the room, they uplift the whole atmosphere. How do you feel? Of course, you feel wonderful. So in the same way, when I connect with the divine, because he is the ocean of love, the ocean of peace, the ocean of purity, what will I experience? I will experience all of those wonderful attainments. So when I connect with God, I will experience what he experiences. And not only that, but I will be able to fill myself with his attainments because he's overflowing. He's that transmitter that's constantly giving, giving, giving. So the more I connect with God, the more I become like God because I receive his powers, his love, his attainments, his wisdom. So I become in that sense, God's equal. Now, the other reason why we should remember God is we need to understand the philosophy of karma. You know, in today's world, there's a ever increasing sorrow. It's like people are drowning in an ocean of sorrow. That's because of negative karma. They have to settle those karmic accounts. Because we don't have the resources to settle karma, we experience a lot of upheaval, a lot of stress, tension, sorrow, you can say, peacelessness. But when I connect with God, God also remembers me. When I remember God, God remembers me. There's a karmic account that's been created. See, if I don't remember God, God doesn't remember me. See, if God remembered me, he would have to remember every soul in the world, but he doesn't. We have to take that first step. We have to initiate that step. So when I remember God, two things happen. Two very special things happen. One is that I get power from God. The second is that when I remember God, and I remember God from the heart, it's not out of blind faith. It's not a wing and a prayer type thing. No, it's definitely with understanding. When I remember God from the heart, God is also very forgiving. He's very loving. And in that remembrance, my karmic accounts that are negative start dissolving. It's just like there's an absolution of some of my karmic accounts that are negative. So this is why people say in different religions, remember God because your sins are absolved. And it really is the case, because God is very generous in the sense that he doesn't want us to experience suffering and sorrow. So he wants to remove our sorrow, but he will not remove it until we remember him. Otherwise, if we didn't remember him, he would have to remove everyone's sorrow. There would be no sorrow in this world. And this is one of the reasons why people don't turn to God. They don't believe in God. But we need to explore further on that. So the more I remember God, the more I experience his attainment. And the more I remember God, the more my karmic accounts are also settled. And these are karmic accounts, especially of previous births. You know, I know what I've done wrong in this birth, but I certainly don't know what I did wrong in my previous births. But God knows. That's why they say God knows. So the more I remember him, the more my sins are absolved. It's like when you charge your phone, you know, you can connect it to the mains and the battery receives power. But if you then disconnect it immediately, the battery hasn't really charged at all because it just experienced some power to get it sort of going again. So what do you have to do? You have to leave it connected to the mains for a period of time before the battery becomes fully charged. It's the same principle with God. The more I remember God, the more power I receive, the more my spiritual battery is charged. So this is Raj Yoga, connecting with the Supreme. And when I connect with the divine, I get the spiritual resources. So on one hand, you could say there's a sale going on. The debt on my karmic accounts are being subsiding because I'm remembering God, but also I'm accumulating spiritual power. This gives me the resources to cope with the negative karma that I have to deal with. When I have the resources, then I'm settling karma without the pain. And this is the fastest way to settle karma, is through remembrance of the divine. So it's a soul-to-soul connection. Now, how does God see us? How do you think God sees you? Well, he would see us the way he sees himself, as he sees himself. He would only have self-respect. And because of that self-respect, he would only see us with respect. He would only see us in our purest form, in our highest form. And finally, why is God God? Why can't others be God? One very simple reason. We, the soul, have come from this non-physical dimension to play our part in this physical world. And in doing so, we're bound by the physical laws. And when we're bound by those physical laws, and one of those laws is the law of entropy, the law of change, then the soul's purity starts declining, it starts diminishing. Just like if we are in the UK, we drive on the left-hand side of the road, but on the continent, they drive on the right-hand side of the road. Now, even though I'm used to driving on the left-hand side of the road here, but when I go over to France, I can't drive on the left side of the road because that's not the law. The law there is, it's on the right-hand side of the road. So I'm bound by the laws of France. Or in the same way, when the soul comes into this physical world, it's bound by the laws of the physical world. But what if the soul remains outside of that world altogether? So if I never went to France, I would never be bound by the laws of France. So in the same way, what makes God different from all the other souls? Why is he the supreme? It's because he remains outside of the cycle of birth and rebirth. So therefore, this one soul would never, ever become impure. So what makes God different from all the other souls is that he always remains soul conscious because he's outside of the cycle of birth and rebirth. If he did come into the cycle of birth and rebirth, what would happen? Well, he will end up just like us. We would become body conscious. He would also eventually become filled with the vices. Fortunately, that's not his role. So God is just a point of light. So no human being can be called God. It would be against the spiritual laws to call any human being a God. Because if I say so-and-so is God on a physical level, there'll always be an objection from others. So God has to be universally accepted by all, regardless of which faith one belongs to. So God is always a point of light. And if I said God is light, then every religion, no religion would deny that God is a point of light. God is light. So I hope I've given you some sort of food for thought, and you'll think over this. Now, in this final session, we want to explore how to connect with the divine. It's having to have Raj Yoga, how to have yoga with the one who is the divine. Okay. So again, it's a very simple process. Anyone can connect with God. The only thing that we need to do is to let go of this physical consciousness and connect with the God as a point of light. So the first thing we've got to do is stabilize in our awareness, I'm a soul. So whatever you're doing right now, just sit very comfortably, sit relaxed. Just come into the awareness, I am a soul, a point of light. And I sit in the center of this forehead. a sparkling star. And now, I let go of this physical body and I fly away. I fly beyond this room, this building, this city, and I fly higher and higher, a tiny star. I go beyond the clouds and the sky. I fly beyond this planet and all the other planets, past the sun and the stars. And I go beyond the world of sound to a world of silence. The self-luminous world of red light. A world of stillness. For I, the soul, have come to my eternal home. This home of silence is the supreme light, the supreme soul, the supreme Father, the Father of all souls. And I am drawn to this light. For I have come to the shores of the ocean of knowledge, the ocean of peace. And I sit with the divine. My mother, my father, my friend, my companion. And he accepts me unconditionally and fills me with all his attainments, his powers, his virtues. He makes me a master ocean of peace. And I remain absorbed in his company, in his love. He removes all my burdens, my worries and fears. He makes me light. I come to the One, who is the merciful Father, who restores my dignity, my honor. And I belong to the One, who is ever pure, ever peaceful. And now, I take leave from the ocean, and I fly away. I, the soul, the point of light. Leave the world of silence behind. I come back into the physical world. I fly past those stars, the sun, the planets, and I see a beautiful planet. And I come down onto this stage, I come down through the sky and the clouds. I come back into this city, this building, this room. Once more I sit in the physical body, and I, the star, sparkle in the center of the forehead. Radiating peace. And I keep this connection with the divine, even whilst in this body. And I take power. Power that makes me powerful. The power to rule over myself. This is my natural awareness, a peaceful soul, a tiny star. Om Shanti. Thank you for joining us. And please practice this meditation and bring God into your life. Explore the different relationships and experience His presence. Om Shanti.